Thanks everybody for being on time. Welcome to our second to last Zoom set Tuesday evening Zoom. We have this is a fun one. Dr. Sora is going to lead you through conversation, talking about emerging technologies, which I don't know. I've always considered myself a bit of a tech geek, so I love finding and hearing about new things that can make our lives maybe a little easier, maybe a little harder at first, maybe a little easier in the long run. So I don't believe I have any announcements, other than it was nice to see most of you on Friday last week. And that if you have any follow-up questions or anything that came to mind after the session, please feel free to reach out to Angela Martin, um, Dr. Pinals or Mark McWilliams. They're great resources around advocacy and the work that they do at around the state. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to you, Neil, and we'll get going.
Thanks so much, Mike. Can everybody hear me okay? Great.
Yep.
I want to apologize for being mobile right now. I'm getting back from a conference in Utah, and I'm still on the road trying to make my way back, but I should be back in the next 25 minutes. So I will switch to my laptop on a much more stable connection at that time. To start with, I just wanted to give a very broad introduction both to the topic and myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Neil Soros. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I have been involved with telehealth since 2008, 2007, 2008. So a good more than a decade before COVID. And with emerging technologies, probably since 2007 as well. Because I have had collaborations with and faculty appointments in colleges of engineering, where some of my brilliant EC colleagues develop technologies to use with individuals with disabilities. So I thought this would be a good topic to tackle, but I'm more interested not in what I have to say, but in your thoughts, your perspectives, and more importantly, your feedback both about the topic itself and how it relates to your everyday practice. We will have some breakout sessions where we will charge each group with a couple of questions to brainstorm amongst yourselves in small group and report back to the big group. And I will defer to Mike on the timing of that. But what I thought we'd get started on is we'll break it out. And over the years, I've done this. We want to be careful not to give one topic a lot more time than the other. We have finite time to cover both. So Mike will be a very strict timekeeper. We will go exactly split half the time for each. I know in the past people got so excited about one or the other, and then it didn't do justice to both. I mean, each one could have its own hour and a half, but I've been asked to squeeze them. So why don't we get started? Mike, could I ask you, would it be better, you think, to start with telehealth or to start with some of the person-centered technologies?
I think telehealth is a good place. I think most people are familiar with it. Yeah.
Okay. And I think what we can do is we can do the next 20 minutes of discussion and then some breakout rooms. So maybe 15 minutes discussion, send them into breakout rooms for 10, 15, and then regroup and spend 15 minutes. So 45 minutes of the 90 is going to be telehealth. Fine. So real quick, I'll give you all some broad discussion points on telehealth, and 2023 is going to be a critical year, 2023 and 2024. And let me explain why. As you're all aware, more than 3 years ago, the whole world changed and everyone said, how do we continue to engage our clients, our patients, and one another? And everybody felt, well, video technologies are there, they exist, they've been used, we can do it. Right off the bat, the reason 2023 and 2024 are critical is because on May the 11th, the pandemic declaration will be over by the federal government. So AKA, even though COVID will continue to exist, all the protections, rules, and supports of the public health emergency, as they call it, the PHE, will cease to exist on May the 11th. And that means there will be some significant changes to telehealth as well. Many of which will not affect you, but some of which might. And I want to put that out there partly because when I developed the slide decks, the federal government had not, usually they did it in 3-month increments. And so every 3 months since March 2020, they've renewed it and renewed it and renewed it. And on January 31st, they said no more renewal. May 11th is time's up. So I didn't put those slides in. That's why I wanted to put it out there now for you guys. So the most important things that affect you actually period till December 31st, 2024. So not right away. And those are the really important things. So patients can be in their homes. That goes till 2024. People can do it from a hospital, from a rural health clinic, from a federally qualified health center. Those stay for the time being. The reimbursement is a tough one. I'll come to that later. But audio only, where you, for whatever reason, if the patient does not have good broadband and you want to convert it to a telephone encounter, that goes to December 31st, 2024 as well. So those are really some really important ones. Oh, and who can do it? They expanded it from beyond physicians to social work, psychology, speech, all providers could use it. And that will also stay for a bit. Now, the federal government only has so much power over the insurance companies. They only control Medicare. And you go, wait, isn't Medicare for 65 and up? Yes, it is. And very few of us have clients or interact with people 65 and up. I guess some of you would. I don't as much, but I guess audiology goes across the lifespan, physical therapy, etc., pharmacy, etc., dentists. But they have some influence because Medicaid, which covers about 30 to 50% of Michigan's population, especially depending where you practice, that is set by the states. And Michigan has been a very good front runner in terms of some of those rules. So even though the feds go, yeah, this needs to stay, Michigan already is ahead of the game. And they actually implemented the at-home telehealth 15 days before COVID hit. Whether that was deliberate or fortuitous, I don't know. But March 1st, 2020, Michigan made their own rule, regardless of what the feds say. So the reason I'm bringing this up is you have to stay on top of the regulations. You cannot practice telehealth, nor do research or show interest in telehealth without knowing regs, because they are very fickle, they're very transient, they shift from state to state. And so always know your local rules and know the big, broad rules. The three things that are going away immediately, one which may impact only a few of you, is controlled substances. So for example, if Julie was to prescribe a controlled substance, or somebody was working with a pain clinic, etc., that is no longer allowed electronically through telehealth without knowing your patient in person. And that's because of the Ryan Act and about trying to combat opioid abuse. There are a lot of people upset about that because they've come to rely on their pain medicines in a good way, not abusers, and getting to a doctor's office might be burdensome. The one which definitely will impact everyone is what technologies to use at the pandemic time, because everyone was rushing on board. The government said, it doesn't matter, you can use anything. Now, I've been using it since 2008, and I was only allowed to use a handful of technologies. But then they go, use Zoom, use, FaceTime, use, WhatsApp, use it all. Because they said, they wanted as many people to use it as possible. That is going away. And what the rule is, it must be a HIPAA compliant platform. So it's best if everyone quickly finds out from their organizations or their practices or their mentors, hey, have I been using the HIPAA compliant platform? Because if I'm not, effective March the 11th, I might get dinged or fined or told off if I didn't switch. So the good news is most of the very common platforms are, but some people use some eclectic video software that might not be. So that's just a good homework for you guys is anyone who's using telehealth, just make a quick phone call or send an email to your IT person and go, how is what we're using HIPAA compliant? Because effective May 11th, if it's not, that's a big problem for you. So that's just what I wanted to share about the new regulations, because it's hot off the presses. There's still a lot of debate in the last 2 months about how it affects various people, but just know you're mostly okay, except make sure you're using the right technology. And if you're prescribing, you got to probably see the patient, not all the time, but sometimes. You can't just do everything through video. So those are the summary of that. What I'd like to do is, before you go into breakouts, could you, in the next maybe 3 to 4 or 5 minutes, anyone raise your hand, come on, unmute, put your cameras on. I want broad strokes about how telehealth has improved or worsened your personal practice, or your training grounds, or your supervision by your mentors or your supervisors. Just a few things, 4 or 5 people, whoever wants to speak up, that's good, because everyone will have a chance after the breakout anyway.
So this is Erin speaking. I'm in a clinical doctorate program, and of course we started just as COVID shut down in 2020. So we ended up doing, I'd say, a pseudo telehealth kind of thing where we were virtual for clinic. So we'd be just little floating heads on the laptops going around to seeing the people once the clinic did reopen. But then on a personal level, I am a participant of telehealth for appointments, and it's kind of been helpful for me because I don't have to drive anywhere. So if the weather is really bad or if I'm really nervous or something, I can just kind of be in the safety of my own home. But there's also no closed captioning, so that's kind of important for me as somebody who's hard of hearing. So there's pros and cons for both of them.
And Erin, thank you for that. The one thing I would suggest, since you're a consumer of telehealth as well, the one thing to be mindful of is check with your providers whether they're changing anything as well, because that's the thing on the patient end. Some of them might suddenly get a rude shock that their providers are cutting back because the regulations might make it a little harder for them. Also, the billing, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will, might make it a little more challenging for them to collect the same number of pennies on the dollar. So you bring up a very good point. Some of us are both, consumers of telehealth and providers of telehealth, and you gave us a good reminder of that. Thank you. Anybody else?
Go ahead, Emily.
Hey, Dr. Soares. So I'm also a consumer and I guess provider of telehealth. I was able to do some telehealth appointments at Dr. Soares' clinic, which was really interesting. The patients loved them. A lot of really busy parents were able to do those appointments, while they were waiting to pick their kid up from school, things like that. It was much more convenient for those parents and didn't disrupt their day nearly as much. That was on the peds side. On the psychiatry side of things, telehealth is, it's not going away anytime soon. Tons of patients love it. Really hard to access mental health care in rural areas. And I think telehealth provides one of, if not the best avenue for doing that. It's, at the regional conference for the Midwest, it's being discussed as incredibly valuable to reach those rural areas that really don't have those providers in person at all. And then as a consumer, I was on a very busy rotation and would not have been able to see a doctor in person and was able to see someone through telehealth. So very useful for me as well and efficient, time saving.
And that's exactly one of the big selling points to consumers, Emily, is the efficiency and the convenience. And that has really propelled the rules to be extended because a lot of consumers reached out to their congresspersons and insisted that this not just be shut down. So that grace period was put into the new CARES Act and was extended. And it's mainly because of very strong advocacy from patients, patient representative organizations, and not just the providers. Because just like mobile banking and with, being able to do a lot of things, travel, etc., virtually, People really like their healthcare. The satisfaction percentages are off the charts. I haven't seen a study with under 94% satisfaction with telehealth. So, it would be really catastrophic if it all went away. And you just pointed out that the word convenience and efficiency, I would debate efficiency just slightly, only because there are some providers who are not efficient telehealth, just not as practiced. But absolutely for the patient end of it, it is truly a lifeline for some families.
Go ahead, Lauren.
We'll break into breakouts.
Yeah, I was gonna say something very similar to Emily. As someone who's the receiver, I guess, of telehealth, there have also been times where I've been on rotations and I would not have been able to go to my doctor at all. But I can do a 5 to 10 minute telehealth visit, especially things for a provider you already know, and if it's for something simple like a med check, so that you're able to get your prescription. I don't have time to drive 30 minutes away to my doctor's office and see them for literally 5 minutes to say that I'm good taking the same medication I've been taking for 10 years. So like, it's way more convenient that way. And in addition, like, I haven't been able to do a ton of telehealth as like a provider, but at the very beginning of the pandemic, my dad was, he's a primary care provider, and I will say his issue with it was connection. Obviously, like, everyone was online, and so everything was very, very slow. A lot of older adults have issues, which is his main patient population, have issues working telehealth, which I'm trying not to stereotype, but that is usually the population that has more difficulty with it. And so half of the appointment was spent him trying to get them on the phone or a computer of some sort. And so it wasn't as accessible to some people in that way. And additionally, it's really hard to obviously do a physical exam or something, like if there's some sort of thing where you kind of need to really see the person and look at them to figure out if there's like an emergency of some sort. It is really difficult to kind of have to explain how to do a physical exam on yourself. That's something they don't usually teach you in med school, because you don't usually have to do it. So that was, I know, something that he had an issue with.
And it's not a stereotype, actually, because the research has shown that the lowest uptake and the lowest satisfaction of telehealth is with generally patients over the age of 60. And the absolute reverse were for the 18 to 25 age group. So there is a generational shift in comfort with technology that plays into telehealth. So it's absolutely been seen in the research. And you brought up a very good point, or I'm going to assign the questions, and you've actually helped me remember a key thing that we forget about, which is the equity in telehealth, and how can we be equitable to all our patients given the various different barriers that they face. So Mike, it is now 5:50. So why don't we now spend about 10, 15, maybe 10 or so. And I want to mix things up, because based on what Lauren said and another thought I had, the two questions I want the groups to have, so how many groups, Mike, would you be breaking them up into? Two?
I have them in 4 groups right now, but I can switch it.
4 is fine. Why don't 2 groups tackle this question? What are the inequities that clients and patients face when it comes to telehealth, and what can you do to alleviate them? And then the second one is more reflective, personal. So 2 groups can tackle that question, and 2 groups can tackle this question, which is, what can you do to advocate for more telehealth use in your practice or in your, domain of life? So depending if you're somebody from the family center, or they have, people who are self-advocates, what can you do to be a consumer advocate, and a provider can talk about to be a provider advocate? So if you could put those in those various chats, and when they come back in about 10, 12 or so, so Mike, if you can assign maybe a return at 6:05,
Okay.
And then we'll maybe spend 10 minutes discussing, and we'll promptly shift to emerging technologies at 6:15. How does that sound?
Sounds good. So just to recap, so the first question, how can you advocate for equity in
Yes. Yeah. So
telehealth
what are
use?
the what are the inequities, and how can you advocate for, reducing those? And then the other one is, how can you be, so I always think of, you do something for others and you do something for yourself, right? Advocating for others, advocating for self. That's the most powerful two punch. If you
Okay.
only always spend your life advocating for others and you don't engage in self-care, you're getting nowhere. So how to be a better advocate for your own practice and for your own life when it comes to
Okay.
telehealth. Okay.
Sure.
And then Mike, what I'll be doing while they're in breakout, I should be in the next 7 minutes, 8 minutes, be at a stable thing, and I'll reconnect.
Okay. I'm going to open up the rooms. I'll pop into each room as well, okay? And I can pop the questions into your chat. All right.
I'll summarize some of the thoughts you all had about the inequities that patients face with regarding telehealth, and how you all would advocate for a reduction in those inequities. And we can have it. So we're going to give you guys only 5 minutes between the two of y'all to summarize and come up with some thoughts and ideas. And then the next group will have 5 minutes, and then we'll get ready to move on to the next. So go ahead. 1 and 2 spokesperson, please, each.
I can chat quickly from group 1. I'll just use one of our main points that we discussed for time. We talked a lot about access to internet and broadband services, and we kind of talked about our experiences living in rural communities and what that has looked like in the past. And how often individuals in these areas that don't have access to these to internet. So how could we expect them to be participating in telehealth services? The ways that we had talked about to help address these inequities is definitely to support local, state, and national level efforts to increase broadband access. And we also chatted a little bit about how during COVID there was the $30 discount, or I forget exactly what it was called, but other bills to support access financially, but then also increasing the geographical area of where these services reach. So that was one of our main points of discussion.
Thank you. That was very well summarized, and I will follow up on that. But I want to hear from group 2 if you want to talk about a different point that you guys brought up, because I think Amy's point is well taken.
We can talk about something. Oh, sorry.
You're good. So we did hit on that a little bit. Another point that we brought up was that stable internet connection and privacy. So if you are, bouncing from house to house, or you're working with homelessness, it's just not dignified. It's not appropriate to have to do your medical appointments via telehealth in the Starbucks, so that kind of seems like more of a city by city or district by district thing to address, just because everybody's different with those kind of things. But we also talked about how privilege plays into what times you're available, and then the time available to kind of fight with insurance companies. So as these changes are happening, it does take time to discuss things with insurance companies, and some people don't have several hours for several days to make these phone calls.
That is fantastic. I hadn't even thought about that. Thank you for that. It is a privileged thing to be able to negotiate systems, to be able to be persistent, to know the phone numbers, to follow through with them, to talk to somebody to give you guidance. The privacy thing is very well taken. A lot of kids during the pandemic had to park their cars and pick up Wi-Fi signals from their schools in the parking lots or in stores, etc. And the privacy is a good point, but also it is the risk people run. They're having to go and be in a secluded area or in a public area, and it's really hard. You can't really, for me, I can't get a good picture of a child's behavior when they're in the backseat of a car. And so, yes, another point I will bring up, and then I will circle back to what Amy said, is the one that has really captured my attention in the last year and a half has been the non-English speaking patients, those who have literacy diversity as well as English as a second language. There is a huge paucity of availability of interpreters through telehealth, because some of the platforms that are used are closed system platforms. And unless you have an interpreter with you in your organization, it becomes near impossible to bring in a third-party interpreter into some of those systems. And of course, the other problem becomes most of the instructions that people send out to for telehealth is in English. And a great example is one of the portals that was there for the main electronic health record had no Spanish version. And when there was a Spanish version, there were organizations that weren't deploying it, even though it was free. And so there's these barriers that if a Spanish speaking patient wanted to access a virtual visit, they'd had to go through these instructions that are all in English. And then if they would pose a question back, then nobody would respond to them because the texts on the other end were not, highly competent linguistically. So that is another thing. To Amy's point, the FCC broadband benefit, and Mike, if you could put that link in the chat, continues to exist, and it's there both for the broadband coverage, but they also have a small portion for device coverage. The great news is Michigan got a massive amount of money from the feds and are doing a yeoman's job of implementing broadband across the UP, across some rural parts of Michigan. So that has been a high priority for the state. Not every state used federal COVID and other dollars for that, but we were forward thinking and have tried to improve this. Another thing that's there is, of course, Starlink. Not that I'm a big Elon Musk fan, but that has really been a game changer for people where there haven't been enough cellular towers or the monopolies of certain broadband and other, providers in their neighborhood. So, there's still not perfect coverage, but I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon and Mike, we have leadership faculty who have used that, right? Because of their own living in rural areas. I forget who it was. It may have been somebody from the Family Health Center.
I don't know. It's not ringing, Sharon, it's not ringing bells for me. Mike or Lisa?
Yeah, no, I remember talking about that. I don't know. Was that you, Lisa, that talked about that? No. It's okay.
They're talking about it.
Yeah,
those things are still a wonderful opportunity. Things could be better. Clearly, the speed and that's why the feds decided not to take away audio-only telehealth. There was a huge push to take that away because people felt that when you're not actually seeing the client or the patient, the quality might suffer, the client-provider relationship might suffer. But finally, people said, you know what? If you take that away, the people who don't have access the way you talk, they will have no access at all. So that's going to be there till 2024. But these are all terrific points. We have to pivot to the next, but one last thought would be, Mike, if you can post in the chat, there's now, you guys are familiar with Michigan. That's terrific. Some of you, after your training, might go to other states. You might go to other areas of the country. And so I am going to share with Mike, while we get on to the next discussion, a website that you can go and find out what each state's report card is for telehealth and where they're lagging and where they're strong. And then you will know where you stand. If you decide to move to Kansas or Kentucky or Alaska, etc., it's different in terms of the patient access, in terms of the billing. We didn't even get into billing, but that is a huge problem because that is also going to go away at some point, where they were doing parity and they would pay the same amount to the provider for in-person and telehealth, and it's going to go back to, I fear, 60 to 80 cents on the dollar. And that's going to make it problematic for some providers. They're not going to feel like wanting to do it. So, when Aaron and others talk about being consumers of telehealth, well, what happens if your provider goes, it's not worthwhile for me to do telehealth visits anymore because I'm getting paid less, right? So we suffer as a result. So Mike, I will send you that link now, but let's pivot. It's 6:16, 6:17. I want to stay on time. Let's talk about person-centered technologies, emerging technologies. While I pull up that, I want to do the same thing. I want to invite you guys to reflect on and say a few words about what your thoughts were looking at that module, listening to Haben Girma, and thinking about this in a new way. We're still going to break you out into groups with specific questions, but just some overarching thoughts about where you are with your interactions with more haptics and other types of technologies that could be wearables, etc.
So this is an area that I'm actually pretty passionate about. Is I work in speech. I'm a speech path grad student. One of the things that I'm really focused on is AAC, so alternative and augmented communication, and what that looks like. I had the privilege of presenting at our national conference last November, and there I actually got to see a lot of really cool and interesting upcoming tech in the haptic community world, whatever you want to call it. I got to test drive a power wheelchair that is operated by your eyes only. So for people that have paralysis or hemiparesis, whatever it may be, that they can't operate a wheelchair with their hands, that they can use their eyes to do so. A couple of other things that were really cool is like a helmet that you actually use your eyes to type out sentences for people that, again, can't speak, or choose not to speak, whatever the case may be. So I saw a lot of really cool up and coming resources out there for communication and mobility aid while I was at ASHA this past November. I think one of the most important things to me in that realm is that there's a saying in speech path that everyone deserves a voice. Everyone deserves the freedom to speak as they will. And so providing AAC and other alternative communication aids is really critical in ensuring that everyone has that voice to speak. And so I think as clinicians, it's our responsibility to make sure that augmentative aid, whatever it may be, whether it's AAC or mobility aids, whatever it is a well-educated, knowledgeable topic, and that the parents are aware of, or the family is aware of, or the client is aware of these resources out there. Because honestly, I've seen tech there that I have never even once dreamed of. And this is stuff that's on the market. This is stuff that's out there. And I would have had no idea that it was there. So I think as clinicians, we have a role to play in that and making sure that we provide that knowledge to the family. So
Grace, you're completely correct. We are the better advocate if we are knowledgeable, because sometimes the clients find out about this from a third-party source, maybe from a vendor, maybe from the internet, and they come to the provider with the expectation that the provider is the content expert. And we are not content experts in emerging technologies because we sadly work in this space and the developers work in this space. The developers are thinking commercialization, venture capital funding, being the first out of the gate and doing well. And we're thinking tried and tested, making sure it's patient-centered, and those words don't often interact. So you're absolutely right. We'll talk more about that, but you're right. Being knowledgeable will make us better advocates. And that's part of my desire to have this. Excellent. Anybody else, please? I know Mike has had experience with the visually impaired population and technologies, and he was very interested in the things that are happening on the east side of the state, right, Mike?
Which ones was that?
You were talking about automotive and stuff like that last
Oh,
year.
right. Yeah. The autonomous vehicles. That's been a
Autonomous. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah. That's been there's so much work going on in that area. Just mobility in general.
Yep.
For all disabilities across the board has been. It continues to be a huge area of development for sure.
And Mike, while we're chatting, I remember in the past somebody dug up an incredible news center at MSU or somewhere that is looking at emerging technologies and stuff. If you wanted to throw that in the chat, yeah. Emily, go ahead, and then Rana.
So we actually, one of the conferences I went to last year, the focus was on use of technology in psychiatry, pretty heavy focus on telehealth. Well, we had a really fantastic presentation by a researcher who, there were some privacy concerns here, but they were looking at strokes. So an app to download on a smartphone for people with bipolar disorder that could predict episodes of mania before they happen. This is what the research is on, based on the speed of the keystrokes and the number of errors made and corrections. And so just some really interesting new uses for technology. And it didn't add any burden to the user either, because it was just looking at behaviors that they were already doing. So I don't think it's been published yet. I've been looking for it, but just really interesting new stuff. And not all of it actually has to add additional steps or burden to the person using it.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, conferences, presentations are great ways to stay up to date, because sometimes we don't subscribe to the same literature as some of the researchers. We're tending to look in the medical journals and some others, and they tend to put some of their content in IEEE and other computer science and other either conferences or abstract publications. And we're reading this literature and they're publishing in that. And so that's an important point, is we've got to be invited to some of these things. And I know, LEND is a great forum to get invitations and heads up about different things happening and then disseminate to us. Rana, yes.
Yeah, actually, there's one we were thinking about. We have one client, she's moving next year to school and she's non-vocal. She's using her iPad as a communication device, but we're thinking about something easier to transition. And there's the talk track. It's a watch that you can record like 4 messages and we can change it, which is not expensive, and we can change the message. And there's a lot out there, even like for families, if they cannot afford iPad, there's so many technologies that they can use. And if we know about it, we can help them better. So, and also there's a lot of free apps to communicate and that we can offer for the family to use if they cannot afford the more expensive apps.
You're absolutely right. And it comes back to the same thing about we can't guide them if we don't know, right? If somebody only knows about the top 2 apps that cost money and the provider or the therapist doesn't know about the rest, we can't guide them. And so it's a heavy burden for us as well to grasp a body of literature or information that is not our content expertise. But you guys are adept at that because you are in LEND and you're all learning from one another. Each one has a different area of interest and expertise, but you all are finding ways to cross-teach one another. But this would be great to learn about new technologies from your own experiences. Go ahead, Rana. You want to say something else?
Yeah, there's also like a switches for scissors and so many other things for motor skills that if we know about it, we can help the student to use, like especially like with scissors, a lot of like kids, they struggle, and we can use switches to let them cut and do crafting and all that stuff.
I did not know that there were switches for cutting. I did not know that. That's good to know. So Mike, it's 6:25 and I was thinking we'll do again a breakout. And these are the questions that I want to challenge. The same thing, and we can have, you can mix it up now, Mike. We can do 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So 1 and 3 can get the same question. The first question becomes this. How do you partner with the developers of emerging technologies in order to better serve your clients or patients? Okay, so that's one thing. I want to challenge people to think about. The other one is, how do you ensure privacy and patient-centeredness with technologies, right? So how do you make sure you protect the privacy, but also make sure that the technology that you're recommending or looking into serves the needs of the client or the patient? And I'm coming back to that famous little beehive little matrix about, usability, etc. So think about that is like, you are an advocate for them, and there's this new tech that's out there and you want to know about it, but how do you proceed? So one is going to be partnerships, because Lend is an incredible partnership, but maybe it's time to start thinking about who's on the other side, the developers and the vendors. And then on this side, say, oh, we have stuff, but wait a minute, the privacy and the importance, the patient or the client-centeredness important. How do I balance that? So Mike, you can assign whichever question to 1 and 3 and the other question to 2 and 4. And we'll give them about 10, 12 minutes to about 6:40. And then we can come back at 6:40, do the 10 minutes of debrief from them. And then the last 10 minutes is a high level overarching conclusion. Is that okay with you, Mike?
Yep, sounds good. So group 1, Amy, Grace, Kat, and Maya. And group 3, Cheyenne, Lisa, Marcellus, Rachel, and Rana. You can handle that first question in the chat. How do you partner with the developers of emerging technologies to better serve your clients, patients, or those you're advocating for? And then groups 2 and 4, which are Emily, Aaron, Lauren, and Leo, and Ilasia, Jane, Jason, and Julie. You can take on the second question in the chat. How do you ensure privacy with patient-centeredness, privacy and patient-centeredness with emerging technologies? How can you ensure technology serves the needs of the folks you're working with and advocating for? Okay, so we will come back together at 6:40.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. Let's have, just like the first thing, a spokesperson from group 1 and a spokesperson from group 3, going one after another. Let's talk about how do you partner with developers of emerging tech to better serve your clients. So group 1, put your first person forward, and then group 3 right after that.
All right, well, I will try to keep this one a little bit quicker than the last one, but we were talking a lot about vetting and making sure that the team that you're working with is someone that really has the individuals in mind that they're making products for. So I kind of made the comparison earlier of like, you've got like a corporate team that's really focused on making money and working off of that. And then you see a lot of issues with like price hikes. You see the cost of insulin, for example, that's just kind of money driven. And then you see people who are actually making tools and things like that because they care about individuals. They want to see them succeed. So I think the first step as to partnering with these groups, with these individuals making these products, is vetting that team and making sure that they care about what they're making. They're not just money driven. And ideally they have individuals who are disabled, who would use these products, who are engaged with this some other way, who are part of the community that they're building products for on the team itself.
Great.
So that would be the first big main thing that we would really want to focus on before we would pursue a partnership.
Excellent. Thank you, Grace. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. You want to talk, basically you're talking about alignment there, right? If you don't find this team out there is aligned with what, then that becomes a problem. Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong in making a buck, but there is something wrong with only making a buck, so that's a problem. Okay. Group 3, please.
So we kind of talked a lot about a lot of similar things that Grace was saying, but we kept coming into like the barriers of what it would be to be working with developers of this, and that's kind of where our conversation focused. But a lot of that was talking about how the people developing them might not even know half of the things that'll happen that will go wrong with the technology. With like, if they're developing technology with like one type of person and one type of disability in mind, there's so many diverse little things within there that won't be hit unless there's someone with a deeper understanding and a more personal knowledge of it on the team making it. So that's a lot of what we talk about, is how we need to like advocate these like smaller things that are going to be overlooked with it.
Absolutely. And you both brought up a very good point. Yes, there's opportunity there. My biggest struggle has always been, then how do we get through the door? They're operating out of eclectic locations, and many of them are just remote. And you're right, some of these are driven by an idea a graduate student or somebody else had, and then they decided to commercialize it. And they maybe know one person with a disability and they develop that product. So the key thing for us, I always feel, is how do we get a foot in the door? How do they know that this group exists, right? We've got to know about the entry points. And, apart from the conferences that we can attend and, read abstracts, send an email to the person who's listed as an author on the abstract, go, hey, I really like the thing. Do you want to talk? It's a myth that they are not interested in us. I have talked to many engineers and computer scientists and people over the years. They would love to, but they're finding the same hang-ups on their end. They don't know how to enter our world. So they're operating here. They're working on a health-related application, but they don't know that there are people with your sets of skills that they could reach out to. Or they do, and it turns ugly very fast because all they're trying to do is milk that person's knowledge to use and throw them aside, right? They don't know. It's not that they don't want to, they don't know how to have partnership. The other big problem is many of us either train in or work in academic settings, and academia doesn't teach you a good job about how to be a good business person. So academia is all about help the client, do your best, publish, present, not how do you commercialize? How do you have a intellectual property? How do you decide, is it a 50-50 split or a 30-70? We don't get trained in that. So there's this knowledge gap that prevents us from being better partners with industry. Mike has put in the chat a very wonderful program that the NSF has done, which tries to accelerate these type of innovations. There are other types of things. I've been part of Smart and Connected Health. And Mike, if you want to pull up NSF's SCH program, and that partners health systems people with technology development people and helps them create a product and get it to market, but more importantly, vet it through good clinical and other trials. And so there are entry points. If you guys are interested, I strongly suggest you start sending emails and asking. And more importantly, just if you looked at the SCH program and you can look at what's been developed in the last 5-7 years, you might find something that's right up your alley, and then you can send an email, and people are generally helped. They go, oh, you're a trainee or you're a young professional. Sure. Only when it comes to disclosing what they're doing, they're not going to let you know. They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, etc., which is fine, which is business. But they're happy to share their off-the-shelf products and their other things. And then you go, wow. And then you might say, hey, I don't think you did a good job here. Do you want to talk about it? And they're all about new iterations and stuff. So those are great thoughts, both of you. Let's talk now about privacy and patient-centeredness. So groups 2 and 4, one person, please, from each.
Some of the things for privacy that we had talked about in terms of kind of the differences of being at a big health system at an academic center versus being kind of on your own as maybe like a one physician, family physician clinic, and that there's kind of the in-between as well that Jane Turner had mentioned about kind of the health departments too, and that all of those have their own unique challenges and also some benefits in terms of privacy and like risk from cyber attacks, as well as kind of resources that can help with that. So while you may be more likely to have a cyber attack at being at a bigger institution, like how University of Michigan had the paging system attacked for the whole health system about a month ago, you may not have that happen at the smaller family physician office that just has the one independent physician that's practicing there. Or at the health department, you may be targeted uniquely kind of with their own electronic medical record system and virtual visit capability, but that the amount of money that is going to be kind of illicitly obtained from the cyber attackers is going to be less than what would be kind of what they would be targeting at a bigger organization, and just kind of the differences about all of those. And it kind of speaks a little bit too about something that we had talked about in the first breakout room session, just that there's kind of a lot of variability across settings, both in the electronic medical record as well as how you actually arrive at virtual visits, and that can cause a lot of confusion from the patient end of things, as well as like how to navigate across different platforms.
And the variability is so key. I agree with you completely. This is why everybody should know about their own practice first and what they are having in their own organizations before you start. Because if you don't know the risks you run, and while cyber attacks is certainly a really, really important one, and I won't say anything more, I want the group 4 to go, but I have been concerned about other aspects of privacy as well, because there are some companies which develop technology and continue to beta test it using the data of the people they sell it to. And it is not understood, because everyone knows the first time you load something or you put something on, you get page after page after page, and you just get scroll, and you hit the word I accept, right? Otherwise you can't use it. And the moment you do that, you have no control, because you might have said, I agree to have my likeness and all my keystrokes be recorded by said company to be used for any and all purposes. And it's an interesting conundrum, because if you don't agree, you can't use it. And so that's the other problem I find, is that we have sold our privacy for the convenience of using technology in many examples. Group 4, what thoughts do you have about person-centeredness and privacy when it comes to tech?
Sure. So we actually touched on something pretty similar. On the provider side, your clients, your patients are really entrusting you with sensitive information, and it's your job to do your research on the systems you're using to see what risks might be run, and to either put pressure on your organization, or if you own your own practice, to then put pressure on those companies or not continue your contracts with them if they are not being transparent about what they're doing with your clients or your patients' data, because you, as their healthcare provider, are someone they trust to protect them from harm. So you really do need to do your research. And we talked a lot about that, asking the companies all sorts of those questions, like, how was this tested? What kind of feedback do you get from your consumers? Maybe talking to other people, while you're shopping around for maybe a telehealth program or other kinds of technologies. Seeing what problems other people have had with it, asking your own patients when you're using it, kind of checking in, because usually these things are on contracts, so you may be able to get something else better once the time limit has run out. Or if you're part of a big system, putting those concerns up the chain. If, usually you have a supervisor or someone you can talk to if your patients are having problems, and that kind of helps ensure that, your efforts at the beginning to get something that is patient-centered and protects their privacy continues to be patient-centered and is actually benefiting them. We talked about sometimes, from the provider side, you think everything is going great. It's easy for you to use, everything's fine, but your patients may not actually be having that same experience. So it is important to continue to check in on the things you're using. I know in medicine, at least, it's pretty quick that you can see like a system will get stuck on something and keep going, even though that's not actually the best option anymore.
And you know what? I absolutely agree. The one solution I've looked at for these type of things is to always include a person, the target person that you're hoping to get on your developer team, on your startup, right? So usability and user-centered design, UCD, is really important. The best companies and the best people will have user-centered design. It's almost like having an advisory board for the products that has at least one, if not more, people who are your target population, and they get. It's not, you just don't milk their knowledge. You compensate them, you listen, you genuinely listen to their concerns, and you incorporate in the feedback, right? That's the whole point about being who we are. We can encourage our patients, our clients, to be part of a user-centered design process. Tomorrow, if somebody says, I have this app that I want to use, well, did you have the person with the particular on your developer team? And more companies actually seeking out people with challenges and disabilities to include in their design teams, because what they don't want is to spend a lot of time and money on a product that is going to get criticized, slammed, and negatively perceived down the road because they didn't do their homework on the front end. Emily, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, our group talked about that at length, making sure that we're trying to catch, the breadth of experiences for users. And we thought, from the provider side too, asking for transparency in the companies that are providing these, what was your testing process? I think we talked about, like Erin brought up something that she knew was being developed for people who had visual impairments, and no one with a visual impairment was actually involved in testing the product. As a provider, you can ask, before I buy this thing or sign this contract for my practice, what was the testing process like? Like asking for that transparency from companies. And the more people do that, the more companies will realize that that is expected of them. If everyone in speech, PT, audiology, all these healthcare professions, before they're willing to sign a contract with a company, asks them about the inclusiveness of the testing process, the more they will realize that that is something that they need to do.
Agreed. And user-centered design, advocacy, and holding companies and developers accountable is really important. I think that it is an exciting field, and Mike can attest to being part of this with the incubator process, the Convergence Accelerator. And so I would strongly recommend that if there are opportunities. So right now I'm working on projects with engineers and engineering students, and me and my medical students, and that cross-pollination is so helpful. So if you guys ever get an opportunity to work with students, because the developers and things like that down the road becomes constrained with the whole intellectual property and other things. But sometimes students do capstones, they do doctoral dissertations, and they do it in health. And it's really good to know in your university or in your part of the state who's doing what, and can you listen in? Can you email with questions? Sometimes they might want to beta test their technology. What about with your patient population or your clients in your clinics? That's how you learn a lot. So that might be a solution. We're almost out of time, so I want to give, I want Sharon and Jane and Mike to talk about their perspectives of this. I thought you guys brought up incredible topics and thoughts and ideas, and I'm thankful Mike is recording that. But I do want, Jane, Sharon, and Mike to sort of weigh in high level about this topic and about your participation in this.
I guess I can start that out. I just think it each year I can see the growing importance of all of you folks really having a broad understanding of the impact that these technologies will have on you in your work and on the folks that you serve and advocate for and treat. So it's just it's something that I know is going to do nothing but grow. And really having a sense of the ethical concerns and the impact on health disparities. That's going to be, I think that's going to be a big one that we'll be discussing in future years for sure.
Yeah, and I don't have much to add. I want to thank you all, and Neil, Dr. Soares, thanks for this, great presentation and great discussion. And it just gets my wheels turning on, just the interdisciplinary nature of LEND, and that, how we engage developer, some non-traditional, disciplines into our cohort so we can really work together and really have meaningful dialogue. And then also kind of made me think about, especially I'm thinking from that conversation about how you get things to be person-centered, also to appeal to folks that where money, money is their bottom line. And not, like you were saying, Neil, nothing wrong with that as long as it's not the only focus, but ways to reflect that by including people with disabilities and hearing their viewpoints and getting their experiences in a really meaningful way is good for business. So those were just really enjoyed listening to you all.
Thank you, Sharon. Absolutely. We should consider, I was saying the same to Mike, right? In expanding our concept of interdisciplinary to go way beyond health. Because, technology is used for health. So, down the road, maybe we can consider that. Yeah. Jane?
Well, I was just thinking about, maybe we should try recruiting trainees from electrical engineering
Yeah.
or the automobile and, who are heading into the autonomous vehicles or augmented communication. There's a lot of bioengineering, and a lot of it is about disabilities, not all of it, but a lot of it, much is into diagnostics. But yeah. Or having, bringing in some folks for conversations.
Yep, that would be great. One of the sessions, in-person sessions, have somebody come in and display tech or talk about things and ask for feedback. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, we are right on the time, and I want to thank everybody for participating. I'm thankful to all of you for thinking about it, more than anything else. There's no right or wrong. Just getting your wheels turning about this will take us all so far. And you guys are so much more adept to technology than I am. I just hopefully you can take it further. And, as Mike said, the last 4 years I've done this, the ideas you all brought up far outstrips things before, because it was initially just, we were just doing lectures and talk about, and now the focus groups bring back things that I go, wow, didn't even think. And thankfully he's recorded it. But thank you all for spending this part of your evening with me. I apologize. I was a little mobile in the beginning part, but I'm okay now.
Thanks a lot.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, Neil.
Yeah.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
And we will see all of you for our final Tuesday Zoom session on April 4th. And actually, Dr. Turner will be leading that one. And yeah, hard to believe we're at the end of the year almost here. So I'll try to have this recording up and available on Canvas in the next couple days for everybody. And I'll put an announcement out. So
Thanks a lot.
great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful
Bye-bye.
evening.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you soon.